Welcome to the 18th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast, brought to you by Animal Riot Press, a literary press for books that matter. It's your producer, Katie, here, and this episode has been edited to reflect our new name. If you're new to the Animal Riot community, welcome, and you can find out more about us at animalriotpress.com. Now on to the episode with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and today's guest, Dave Olimpio.
I'm your host, Brian Birnbaum. We're here today with Dave Olimpio, the editor-in-chief of Atticus Review, which has been kind enough to publish a couple of my reviews.
And mine.
And our lovely producers.
I'm here too.
Yes. Dave is the author of This Is Not a Confession, a book of essays which explores the residual effects of sexual abuse, divorce, and grief, and more. Okay, so yeah, this episode's...
Hello.
Here's Dave. Here's Dave. Here's
Welcome, Dave,
Katie,
into our circus
our
today.
producers. I am going to say that our episode's brand of fuckery is brought to you by parents showing up unannounced.
And
So yeah, my parents are currently holed up in my bedroom, having arrived at my apartment all the way from DC, but 2 hours ago after having given no indication to their travel plans.
We had no warning, and here they are. But we love them, and they brought their dog, which is currently loving on Dave.
Which is really on brand for me, because I have two dogs that I take photos of all the time.
Oh, that's my entire Instagram.
Yeah.
That's literally all my Instagram is. That's why I have an Instagram, is to take photos of Rosetta over here.
So we already know that you're a super generous and forgiving person for doing a podcast in the middle of all this nonsense.
Yeah. This is like classic neurotic Jewish family shit going on right here. You know, my parents like not remembering that they're coming and all that.
Well,
they brought rum cake too, so
we have rum cake
good
to
rum
eat.
cake.
it's probably kosher. I'll check the box later. Anyway, so
And I brought beer, but I'm the only one drinking.
Yeah.
I'll let everybody know that right now.
that is true,
I
which is
know.
actually kind of I feel
Kinda
It's
bad.
not really
I
on
feel
brand
bad.
for us.
That's not on brand for us. No, I was telling Dave that my psychiatrist prescribed me Klonopin recently to help me sleep every now and then. So I'm laying off the booze just a little bit.
Smart.
Being smart. Harm reduction strategies, as the Redditors would say. Okay, yeah. So let's talk about Atticus first, because you are the editor-in-chief, as I said, of Atticus Review. So you bought them, which is very interesting in itself. Let's talk about that a little bit.
That seems to be going on a lot these days, like people buying presses or whatever.
How did that happen?
Well, Dan Cafaro, who started the press, he put out a call for editor-in-chief, and I had known him. He lived in the area of New Jersey where I was living at that time, so I'd kind of known him previously, and I got in touch with him, and then got the job as editor-in-chief, and then I did that for 3 or 4 months, and then my background is in web development, so I kept thinking of all these things I wanted to do with the press, or with the page and everything. And
How long ago is this, by the way?
this was the summer of 2016.
Okay, so it's pretty, fairly recent, not crazy long ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then and he seemed to be kind of like checked out.
Yeah.
I think he was burned out. I don't want to say, I don't mean it in a negative way, but he just seemed pretty burned out. So I kind of ran by the idea with him of like, is this something you still want to continue to do? And because I'd be interested maybe in buying it. So so then we talked back and forth and worked out a deal, and I took it over in January of 2017. And then started doing
when did it start?
When did
Atticus
Atticus?
originally
Well, like around 2011.
Okay.
Oh, that's fairly new. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, because that you weren't like a speculator. You were like you got the job because you wanted it, and then you bought the.
And then I've always liked doing online publishing and stuff. I'm a bit older than you guys, so I was kind of like a blogger, back in the 90s, like the late 90s.
What was your blog called?
Well, it was Not So Linear, which is my...
Oh, yeah, that's your handle.
Which is now my Twitter handle.
Uh-huh.
I was just kind of in the DC blog scene a lot, and just always liked online publishing and online writing. There used to be sort of a intimacy to it that sort of became non-intimate as it went along. I think people started doing becoming this persona in their blog, and then that became really not as cool.
Competing for eyeballs kind of changed it. Yeah,
totally.
Some of the early blogs were like picked up for books and stuff.
Yeah, right.
And now
like
Deuce.
Deuce was like an early one that.
Yeah, you guys remember Tucker Max?
Oh.
You don't know about Tucker Max?
No.
Do you know who? You remember Tucker Max? This is like the most chauvinistic shit.
Yeah.
Like it was a dude. It was this lawyer who basically wrote about his like conquests of women and like alcohol.
Oh, wow.
You know, and
I
they
was
turned into a
thinking more
movie.
like Julia
Right.
and Julia or something.
No, they turned it into a book and then a movie. I mean, that shows how much times have changed over the last. That was like 10 years ago.
We had one of those guys in DC too that did the same shtick basically. I'm trying to remember his name, but I don't even really want to say it because I don't want to plug him. But
Yeah.
he was really big, just doing that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
You know, just really over the top chauvinistic stuff.
Yeah.
And
I guess Tucker Max is like a reformed man, so self-proclaimed,
Yeah,
and like that.
okay.
You know, he's apologized for his way. So hopefully that indemnifies me plugging him. But yeah, so I know what you mean about the blogs. I think one of my theories is that it's like back then, just a lot of people didn't know how to do a blog.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you had Blogspot, like these platforms. It was like a lot of these people were building their own web pages.
Yeah, I did. I mean, because I was a web developer. I mean, I built my own platform and everything. Even though there was there was Blogger, and I started doing that, but then it didn't have enough things that I wanted it to do, so I basically built my own.
Are you the reason Atticus web pages look so good now?
That's right.
Yeah.
No,
it does.
It actually, I was looking at it just before.
Is it custom, or are you guys on a template?
We're on a template, but I can do a lot of customizations to it.
Templates are just easier to hand down after you leave.
Yeah, there's no reason to like start from the.
Yeah.
So for all of you listeners looking, for Squarespace or whatever you're looking at,
What's the end of that thought, Brian?
That's it.
No, I'm actually for hire.
I'm laughing.
So I'm going to plug myself.
Dave.
So I thought that's where you were going. But
That's what I thought you were doing too.
No, I'm laughing at like your deep interest in like whether they're using a template or not.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because I built ours. Like,
Exactly.
Yeah, I do the same thing. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, you have isn't your sister in graphic design or something?
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm actually going to be getting back into that. I mean, I did web development for many years worked for Mothers Against Drunk Driving for their national their national office. I was one of two guys that did their website and their intranet and all that stuff.
That's bringing back some memories right now.
Oh yeah,
because they were always on during like the after school specials and things like that, and so
it's weird. Yeah. They were an interesting place to work for, but I met some great, awesome people that I'm still friends with. So I took over the press in 2017 and then just rebuilt the website, started doing some new things like the weekly Atticus. We have this newsletter that we send out every Saturday morning at 10. And
can you subscribe through the website to that newsletter?
Yeah, and I probably need to like do more to get people to subscribe to that.
What is it? What's AtticusReview.com?
AtticusReview.org. Yeah.
Yep,
we started with a pretty huge email list just because it had been around since 2011 and people had subscribed, but Dan wasn't really sending out too much anymore, like especially the previous maybe 2 or 3 years. And so when I took it over and started doing the newsletters, I mean, we did get a lot of unsubscribes at first because I think a lot of people just didn't realize they were on this list. But now it's kind of balanced out and we get a lot of good feedback from people. We try to do a newsletter where the intro is written by one of the editors each week. And we like to make it a little more personal. So it starts with this sort of introduction, usually on a writerly topic from one of the editors. And then we post every day. So then the Saturday newsletter is just sort of the week's publishings from that week. So.
How many people do you have on staff right now?
It's about 12 to 15. I don't know exactly. I can't remember now. But it's the main editors. Dorothy Bendel's our managing editor. Michael Meyerhofer's the poetry editor. And Michelle Ross is fiction. And then Shauna Craig is nonfiction. And then they each have like some readers under, that help them. And then Aditya is doing a great job with
the reviews.
Book reviews.
Yeah.
I'm so happy you brought
really
that up.
Amazing. The
last review that I submitted to Atticus. This is probably around the time that you were taking over.
Okay.
So I'd written a couple reviews, and then I reviewed a book that I did not like. And I guess it was pretty brutal. And he came back to me and was like, look, can we like...
Okay.
Can we, like,
that might have
this?
been me pushing back a little bit.
And yeah, and I won't name the book or anything, but like, yeah, I was giving my honest opinion, you know, and like it ended up just being like either you like tone it down or like I just chose not to like revise it because I was like I can't, like, you know what I mean? And I totally get it. It's like it's tough because you want to be honest, but at the same time, like when you're publishing stuff yourself, like you have relationships with writers, you have like your own reputation, and like it was just a tough situation, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to suggest that we only publish
good reviews.
I mean, I like people to be critical, but I just don't see. I've had this discussion with some friends. Like, I don't know I mean, if you're like the New York Times or something, like I see the point of a bad review, and even if you get a bad review in the New York Times, like,
it can help
a good
you.
review.
Yeah.
It'll help you.
Yeah.
But like,
Totally.
People want to know for themselves, and they'll still read.
But I
we've
feel
even
like
done that.
in our situation, I just feel like if it's a bad book, then just and I've had it happen several times now where it's like the reviewer just doesn't like the book, and I'm like, okay, well, let's just not review it. You know?
Yeah, better leave it.
Yeah.
I feel that. Like,
Yeah.
there's critical, and then there's just like take down, and it can be
and I think it's important to talk about because I mean on my end it wasn't like I didn't view it as like, oh, I just wasted my energy on that. It's like I kind of I feel like reviews are like an extension of the workshops we did at Sarah Lawrence, like in an MFA program. It's like when you think about someone else's writing, you write why you don't like it. It benefits you. You know?
Totally.
And I can see, especially in hindsight, that it was a book that came out with a small press, and it's like there's part of me that like in a principled sense I was like, well, you know, we need to talk about what makes good writing and what makes, you know, whatever. But I also think that like, yeah, a book that's big enough to come out in the New York Times, it's like, well, let's talk about why this book got a lot of money and recognition. And if it didn't deserve that necessarily, or some people believe that it didn't, that's a good dialectic to have. And I can totally see now how, you know, just like kind of shitting on a book, not like I was out to get someone, but like kind of like shitting on a book that's not going to get that much daylight anyway. It's like, what are we really doing here, you know? Yeah. So I was kind of like, oh, that's an exercise, and I threw it away. You know, it's fine. It was whatever.
It's definitely a tricky topic because I could see the other point of view, which is that maybe we just need more honesty, you know, with especially with Twitter and stuff. I mean, I think there's so much,
especially like fake reviews on Amazon or stuff. Like, you know, like, you know, it's like even when my book comes out, I'm gonna get 25 people. You know, there's a certain number you hit.
I got.
You know what I mean?
A lot of people.
And so there is that other side. I totally know what you mean, but like the only other book that I've panned.
Can you just elaborate on the 25 people? What you actually?
Yeah, I actually, you know what? I actually don't know exactly what it means. Like I just remember at AWP, we were there. You know, about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. Oh, it's been 2 weeks already.
I know.
Were you there? Oh, you were?
Yeah. We saw each other. Booth 9044. Was that it? Oh my God, how do I remember
9044.
That's what
90.
Oh, you said that?
Isn't that?
Good job.
I don't know what I just said.
No, I thought you said 9244.
This is
either
crazy
way,
how I'm remembering.
Impressive.
Like I still feel like I'm in AWP. I still have an AWP.
Well, they were talking at one panel. I mean, this is the vaguest fucking, you know, response I'll ever give, but they were talking about at one panel about how there's like if you hit 25 user reviews on an Amazon thing, like something happens, like some boost of recognition happens. I'm totally butchering this, but you know, that's, and like obviously those are all just shills for your book. Like these aren't like honest like, you know, reviews. And so I can totally see that. But the only other big book, the other book that I panned in a review was published with a major press. And I stand by that too. Like it came out with 3 a.m. and like I was like, this is bullshit. Like this person probably got paid like a decent amount of money. They got a book deal, and like it's not a good book. I'm sorry. Like, you know, like, and this is why. So I don't know. It sucks. It's not like you want to hurt someone's feelings, but anyway, I digress.
We also do film reviews, and those have gotten some pans, you know. But I feel differently about those, especially like the big, you know, because they used to do film reviews, but they mainly do like small indie films and stuff. But now we kind of opened it up, and Allison Lanier heads that, and she also does a really awesome job, and she's brought on some different reviewers, and they've panned some movies, you know. But I guess I feel differently about that because they're they're big movies.
Yeah,
you know, and it's like,
no, I totally feel the same way.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tricky.
Yeah. No, and I really do think that the pattern there is like those bigger movies or the you know, the big press books. It's like you're talking about more about like a privilege and how much like it's something that's earned, you know. So I think it is more relevant. But yeah, so you took over Atticus. When did you start like seriously writing? Have you always been a writer, or?
Yeah, I've always wrote since probably junior high, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, you know, and even before that, I had this journal that I found from my 3rd grade that I like to reference, which is kind of funny because it actually corroborated some things that I wrote about in my book, because I guess that was a very seminal year for my brain. Like a lot of different things happened. But so I went back. Anyway, this is kind of going off topic. But yeah, so I used to write like a little journal in 3rd grade, and then I kind of stopped, but high school, I guess, is when I started more seriously doing it. And then in college, I wrote for my thesis, they let me do a creative thesis. So I did a novella, which is just now in a drawer. And
when's the last time you read it?
I tried I guess it was a while ago. It was like over 15 years ago. I picked it up again because now that I'm 45, 15 years ago I was 30. I thought I'd pick that up and maybe start something with it, and then I realized, no, there's nothing here.
It was way, but yeah.
So, and then I took a long break. I bartended. I did a lot of stuff after college that had nothing to do with literary stuff, and thought I was gonna gather all this life experience. And then
were you writing at the time?
No, not a lot.
You were just I mean, because I'll say after, probably not as long as you, but after undergrad, our 3rd partner, John K, he invited me to go live out in Seattle, and that's how my book's set in Seattle and all that stuff. That's why. And I worked like really shitty jobs, or like you know, they like I had one like graveyard shift concierge job, but like I just like did anything that would allow me to write, but like kind of the same idea. Like I was just like figuring out what I was going to write about, I guess, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I thought I wanted to do fiction, but I think where I found my voice or whatever was in blogging, basically. And that was, you know, again, like around 2000. And I just wrote a lot on my blog, and it was kind of like personal essays, but I didn't know what to call them. During those like early days of blogging, I don't think people knew what to call that writing.
I'm so intrigued by this, especially your perspective. Like, how do you view you mentioned like intimacy?
I mean, I knew a lot of bloggers who were just blogging about their life, and they were doing it in such a genuine way. It wasn't contrived. It was, you know, and there's several blogs that I read around that time, you know, and it's like it feels a little. I mean, and that's where I kind of learned I have a penchant or sort of an interest in nonfiction and memoir and stuff like that. But, you know, just people expressing their humanness, you know, and people did that a lot more genuinely, I think.
Do you think it's because people are competing for eyeballs that like blogs have changed, or like one question that might be an entryway into this question is like, did you put your name on your blog?
I did,
and
yes,
and I guess what was the percent? Like, what would you say? Like, do you think more people were not, or
especially in the DC blogosphere, a lot of people did not. They were mostly private,
and I feel like there's,
and you could be that. That's what's amazing. Like you could be anonymous,
exactly.
Like,
and there's a lack.
I don't
of
know
ego
that you could
in
do that so much anymore.
It's like you're talking about this kind of like contrived, like, you know, persona sort of thing. It's like when you're not putting your name on it, you're like not trying to accomplish anything except for just sharing something with other people. You know,
you got a version, I think, of somebody that was sort of their alter ego, but in a kind of a genuine way, because they weren't out to like make it big or something. They were just kind of doing it
to do it. Yeah.
And so that's what I would do, and I would just sort of write on that, and I didn't tweet it or I didn't do anything with it. I just thought people are going to find this thing, you know. And
did they?
Just other bloggers, you know. It was like question. A really
I'm so fascinated by this like DC blogosphere.
Yeah, because like we all read each other's blogs. And,
why was that? Like, The internet was literally, it's literally worldwide.
I mean, I'm sure there were other readers. I just don't, or people that were from other areas, but I just remember there being kind of this community there in DC that I really liked. There was a good vibe there.
Yeah.
With other bloggers, and we'd have meetups, and we'd meet up at a bar, and that's where people started realizing who one another was. Like, oh, you're so-and-so, and so it kind of took the mask away a little bit. But before that, I grew up in Texas, and I lived in
Houston, was it?
Well, I grew up in Houston, but I lived in Dallas during the 90s and the late 90s and early 2000s. And during that time, I just liked these writers. I mean, I don't know. This person doesn't even know who I am anymore, probably. But there was one blogger that really I liked a lot, named Bluish Orange. Her blog was just called Bluish Orange, and I just thought she was a really great writer. And she wrote about herself in a very honest, intimate way. And and then we'd I got to know that, and then that sort of had its own little group of people that were sort of a clique in this blogosphere thing that I never really fit into. I met a bunch of that clique in South by Southwest. That's where online writers would sort of meet back then.
Yeah.
Which now South by Southwest is kind of like a big it's just marketers, and I feel like. And
I've never even heard of it.
South by Southwest is big.
I've heard of it. I don't know exactly.
It started as a music festival in Austin, and then now they have an interactive thing which started back in the early 2000s, and they have a film division as well. And then there was this other blog that a lot of people knew at the time, Dooce.com, Dooce, and she's one of the first ones that got famous for losing her job because she was blogging.
I see.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And what was she blogging about?
Her family and her baby, and I mean, at first it was just her. She had a dog, and she got married, and that was when I sort of was reading her blog, and then she had a baby and became sort of one of the first mommy blogs, basically.
And she lost her job over it?
Well, this was before she had a baby. She lived out in LA, and she had this job, and she just very opinionated and very honest, and
probably something that wouldn't
direct
lose your job.
Yeah, and at that time it was like
it's like back when Facebook came out, and it's like if you were drinking in your photos, they would be like, oh, you can't do that, and it's like now it's like who gives a shit.
And now like the world we live in is so different, but I mean, and her name's Heather B. Armstrong. She's still she still makes a living off of her blog.
Wow,
selling advertising and stuff. I mean, it's pretty, but it's a very different blog. It's more. Although she is getting back to her roots a little more. I checked it recently because she got sort of, it's almost like she sold out a little bit, she got all this advertising.
Sold
and
out
then,
on the mommy blog. Started taking that Toys R Us money.
Her blog really just became less interesting to me. I mean, it sounded like her doing a shtick on herself all the time, and so
it sounds like you're very, very passionate or like loyal to like honesty and like intimacy, because you said you thought you were going to write fiction, and it sounds like that might have been kind of like the reason that you drove to nonfiction. Like this book of essays is that your only full length book of nonfiction?
So far, I'm working on another one now, which sort of picks up on some of the themes that I started in that one. I mean, I feel like this one, clearly was very personal and very tried to address shame a lot, and that's sort of become my thing that I want to sort of embrace, is talking about confrontation and the transcendence of shame in our lives, because I think that just sucks so much out of us, that there's these things in our past that we hold on to, and then
they're written into our brains.
So
totally.
Will you read some of it?
Sure. I would. We could do that. It's cool because
let's you want to do that now?
Sure.
Because this book is this cover is just, I was admiring this before we started the podcast. This book is put together so beautifully. Ost Press, they do some really lovely work. Do you need the book to read from?
No, from memory.
I'll just plug them a little bit because they're awesome to work with, and I mean I know you guys are a fledgling press now, so I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that'd be
open.
awesome. Yeah, the
Press, we're hitting you up.
people that have hooked us up with other presses to talk to, it's been unbelievably beneficial for us.
Yeah.
Like, just...
And there's some cool things we've been doing with other presses. Like we're planning some collaborative book tours for authors together with other presses.
Cross-promotion, stuff like
things
that.
to help
Yeah.
really help indie authors get more of a platform because this work is super important. We've talked about how we feel like indie presses are the ones that are really holding up like literary fiction and nonfiction and poetry. But yeah, so that's why we're really interested in collaborating with a lot of other presses.
Yeah.
So can you get your book on their website still?
Yep. Yeah, and I think it's even still available on Amazon, maybe. But yeah, I would go through their website. That would probably be the best way. Or through, they also get distributed by SPD. So any one of those three options.
And what's the title again? Just so
This Is Not a Confession.
This is not a confession.
Yeah, and it came from one of the essays. Now I forget which one, but I have that line in there. This is not a confession. I was originally wanting to call it something else. I was wanting to call it Shirts and Skins, which also would have been sort of provocative in a different way because just had to do
That's a
with
basketball reference, right?
Some sort of athletic reference.
When you're kids, you play shirts and skins,
Yeah,
especially
right.
if you're. I mean, clearly if you're boys and you can take your shirt off. I mean, that's our privilege, I guess. our whatever. That's what we, I guess, in our culture get to do. But yeah, so we would play shirts and skins, football or soccer or whatever. But yeah, the babysitter that molested me when I was young, I mean, he lived on my block. So I started, there's one piece in here that's at the end that's fictionalized. It's more like from his voice, basically. And that was actually the first piece I wrote about it.
Wow. Why specifically from his voice?
Because I think I was still trying to figure out like how the hell I can do this, and like I didn't want it to be sentimental. I think that was my main concern, was that it would come across as like sad.
Or sad just for sad's sake, maybe.
Yeah,
instead of what is like what's really going on under the surface here, Because there's this person made the decision to do this to you,
right?
Yeah,
I mean, they were a teenager. They were, he was a teenager, and since then, I've just like kind of looked back and been like, just wondering kind of what he was like, because I don't really remember him at all, except for kind of those times when he kind of came over and we did these things. So there was something interesting to me about writing from his perspective and him being very unremorseful about it, sort of, and that made it seem like a good way to write about it, where it wouldn't necessarily like I was out to elicit sympathy or something. Like I felt like almost if I did it in a way that you were angry at him, that then that sort of emotion would take over the reader instead of like sadness or something. Yeah. So, but it was...
No, you're talking about a lot of what I feel to be like very important things about our society. Like, like I don't think thinking about the perspective of perpetrators is a bad thing. I think it's a helpful thing. It's like to solve things like this. It's like, it's a very helpful thing, It's tough though. It's very hard.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is how was that for you emotionally, just writing that?
I don't know. I mean, I think it was like an emotional time in a lot of different ways, not just because of that. So I was kind of going through depression and stuff, but I don't know. I think I found it good overall. So yeah, and this is like something that I'm really interested in, is sort of this, well, and I should back up and say like one of the reasons that I was able to write about it at all is because my mom had passed away that year, and so that was when the first essays came out about, or that I started writing about it, because I was just, and she was the main person, like I didn't want her to know about it. I thought that it would hurt her.
And she never knew. Oh man,
Yeah.
Wow. How do you feel about that now? Do you still feel good about that?
I still feel fine about that. Yeah, because I think it would have really upset her, and
I can understand that.
It's
kind of wanting to protect her from a thing that she couldn't control, and she probably would have felt guilty for.
But there is all these things about like secrets then, that come, because now, I mean, part of what my next book is about is a secret that I found out about her as I was, like, the final year I was publishing my book. I discovered some things about her. And so that's going to be one of the threads in my next book. So, and then, you know, part of what my next book is about is going to be kind of just not so much about her necessarily, but I want to talk about, you know, still this thread of shame and secrets, but also childbirth and the tension around that, because you know, that was a big deal with my wife and I. We had a lot of issues over the last several years having children, and so I just find it interesting, some of the parallels, I guess, that I never knew my mom sort of had in her background, and that I wish I had known, because I think it would have given more context, and I would have been able to talk to her about children and stuff in a more like honest, or just sort of a more informed way about like what her past was like.
Yeah.
Sort of, you know.
Is this an interesting time for you with like some of the media coming out, like the Leaving Neverland and like stuff like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think those stories definitely.
Did they help, or did they like dredge up a lot of shit, or like a lot, or a little of everything, or?
They just sort of make me. It is weird. It's just weird to think about, you know, especially like as a kid when a lot of this stuff was going on. I mean, I liked Michael Jackson a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you know, so it's a strange, and I think that's part of what. I think that there's a lot more complication to the whole thing than just my part of the story. There's like, you know, whatever was going on in his brain and stuff too.
Exactly.
Which, you know, is not like necessarily something that gets explored, I think, in most sort of sexual abuse narratives, you know, just sort of almost sympathy or sort of trying to figure out where that other person was coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really admire you for saying that, because I think it's extremely damaging to our society that we don't focus on that kind of thing, because obviously our natural inclination is to be angry, of course, you know, but it's like, if you want to solve the issue, you got to actually solve the issue, you know, and that's hard. It is just really hard.
I mean, the thing that really sort of, I guess if to use the word triggered or whatever, but the thing that really got me was when Junot Diaz wrote that essay in the New York Times, and I guess what bothered me most is just how slammed he was after that by so many different people. And I just felt this sense of defensiveness towards him. Because
a lot of people felt that he was preempting the allegations that came out. But either way, I mean, I think it's just clear that it's cyclical.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yes, is it hypocritical? Yes. But is that as important as the fact that of like why he's writing that piece? Yes, he's preempting something, but a lot of times this happens because it happened to them. You know? Like it's
and just the preoccupation,
case, you know?
I think, with, I mean, these are the kind of things that are just really hard to, you know, talk about on Twitter and various things. But I just feel like there's probably a lot of men who, I know that statistically there's a lot of men who've had this sort of thing happen to them, and it's like the idea of sort of acting out in a sexual way because you were sexually abused, I mean, that happens across the board to men and women in so many different ways.
Probably so many ways we don't have documented yet, you know.
And you know, and oftentimes probably a lot of, if they're women, they probably wind up getting labeled as sluts or something, because they probably use sex as a escape a lot of the time, or there's various things that might be going on there, you know. And then for men, unfortunately, they also have there's just, if they're a certain type of man, I guess, or, you know, and then they become into a position of power, then it becomes sort of this other dynamic that's not very appealing.
You know, I'm trying to pose this as not like a selfish insight. What I'm thinking about is, you know, there's a lot of talk about who deserves to write from what perspective, or like, you know, and a lot of it is mostly centered around like race, you know. It's like, can a white person write a book from a like a black woman's perspective or something, you know. But it's interesting because like that's hyper focused on like one certain demographic, But like what I'm thinking about right now is I have a character in my novel who's sexually molested as a child.
Okay.
And it's like I haven't experienced that. Like I'm wondering how many people are out there that it's like, am I allowed to write about that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are the feelings about that? You know what I mean? Like, because I have a lot of the way I present it is that, like, you know, he's, as a young adult, he's a pretty serious alcoholic and clearly like disturbed. I mean, this is like an extreme case, but and then like slowly over the book, you kind of like go back and see a little bit like these kind of like impressionistic shots of like what happened, you know? And I don't know. I mean, it now it's like everything you write about those experiences, like who knows, like if I'm allowed to, or if it works, or like, you know,
there's definitely a sense of censorship, I feel like, that is happening among well-intentioned
people,
liberals.
Yeah.
I mean, I
so
think
you're
that
not really on that end. You're not really.
I'm not, but I would
not
probably
either.
be criticized for a perspective of privilege, and maybe that's why I feel the way I do.
But that's kind of why I bring it up, is because like the script is kind of flipped. It's like, you know, obviously as a straight white male, like, but at the same time, like, this is a huge deal. It's very impactful. So why should that not count as like, you know, am I allowed to like tell that story? You know what I mean? And so I think it's important that like you hold that perspective. That's like, I think people should be able to write about things and explore, you know?
Yeah. Because they might be writing about like something else through that medium, you know, that they don't necessarily want to write about, or, you know, it's just a way to like explore.
Sublimating things,
it's a case by case basis. I'm sure that there's, and really what it comes down to is, do they pull it off? And sometimes they don't. And then,
I totally agree. You know, that's exactly how I think of it. It's like a lot of times when these arguments or discussions come up, I think it really comes down to like, was the writer good or not?
Yeah,
exactly. It's like if you wrote it well, then who's going to complain?
Usually any reviews that come out, you know, are like, there was this YA author recently who is Asian. I don't know what word. I think she's Chinese. I can't remember. But she wrote essentially a YA fantasy novel that has slavery of some kind in it. And she ended up pulling her book. She pulled her own book because of backlash, because people said like something about, and I do not know the whole story, and so I will not like pretend to even be an authority on it. But from what I do know is that she pulled her own book because of backlash, people saying that, you know, the slave narrative wasn't hers to tell. And one, it was like YA fantasy, but also like there's slave narratives. That's Yankee jumping. And so I'm just, we're always interested on like, and talking with people, and especially as a, you know, a publisher of a journal, like who has the authority to write what. And I think a lot of these questions, a lot of reviews I read come from, you know, they end up making stereotypical caricatures of whatever other perspective they're writing from. And I think that if the writing is actually good and they've done their research, that usually people do not get upset. Yeah. That if you're, you know, respectful and taking the care to actually know another culture, that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So we'd be really interested to hear you read some.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
I want to set it up by saying, like, I've said this. I think this will get cut out because we were getting a beer, but I'm going to propose a panel for AWP, talking about AWP stuff. I'm going to propose a panel. This is my first year. I'm going to try submitting a panel. It's going to be about transcending shame through writing. Or did I say this already? I may have said this already.
Well, yeah, a little. You touched on that idea. Yeah, but not
so. But I just think it's a really interesting topic. And one thing that I've sort of been facing for myself, I think, is that, I mean, there's parts of my book that are very lyrical. So like I've kind of been confronting how sometimes I'll write about stuff, and I think a lot of people do this, like they'll write about stuff in a sort of vague way. And so it comes, and it's pretty what they're writing, but it's like you read it and you go, what is it? I don't really know. You can tell this is something personal that you're writing, but I don't know what you're writing about.
It's opaque. Yeah.
So that's always bugged me, especially as like an editor. You know, when I see that, I'm just like, I want to write back. And oftentimes I do. I just write back and say, I think you're writing about something else here. But
do you think it's usually fear of the subject?
Probably. I mean, I think so, but
yeah.
And that's definitely what it was with me. But so there was stuff in here that I think is sort of fun to read, but it's more lyrical and it's less direct. And so
I mean, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I really can't wait to read this.
Yeah, but I'm not going to read that today because that's what I read a lot when I did the book tour. I read this piece called Good with Numbers, which is really fun to read. And
when did you read? That was
this
a while ago.
was a while ago. Like, it
2
would have been
years
during
ago?
my book tour time, so it was like 2 years ago, 2016. I think. And Devin wrote this. I mean, he announces everybody so nicely. He just wrote, said this glowing thing, and I was like, man, I don't even want to read now. I just want to
that's how a lot of people react when they introduce.
We've had a lot of people use our bios as blurbs and stuff like that
Yeah.
on their press. Yeah.
But yeah, and then there's some kind of sensational stuff because I mean, another thread to this book is that my wife and I had an open relationship for the last 5 years or so. So there's a lot of sexy stuff. Like the third chapter of the book is kind of all this sort of sex, which that was also fun to write about. But it was sort of done with the idea of like trying to explore like what it was that what was happening in my marriage, what was happening to me, and also like I lived in the suburbs, which really had bad connotations for me. And so I was writing a lot about how there's all these things happening in the suburbs that it's supposed to be this nice place, but you don't know what's going on behind everybody's closed door. And that's kind of what L.K. James picked up on with the doors on the cover is that whole thing. But what's that?
When you say chapters, what do you mean by that? Like,
did I say chapter? I meant like the whole third section.
Okay,
so there's different essays, but they're divided up into
like
3
part
sections.
Or something. Yeah, okay, I see.
So the first part is like a lot about my mom. Second part is about kind of like my dad, I guess, and then my childhood, and then the third part's about my marriage. And in the middle is this essay called The Big Bad Wolf, which is the most direct I wrote about being molested.
Yeah.
So it's very unlyrical, but now in retrospect, I feel like I wish I had read from it more because I think I was being hypocritical, like, because I want honesty from my writers, but I was sort of...
But that fear was there.
Yeah. Talking about it directly in front of people. So I wound up reading the stuff that was more fun to read. So
it's difficult at a reading series too. I mean,
right. You want to be entertaining,
The dramatic stuff, no matter how good it is, will just get dead silent, and you, as an author, are what's the feedback? And unless somebody bursts into tears or something, it's difficult at a reading. Yeah. So I can understand why you would want the more energizing pieces anyway.
Yeah,
I think it's harder for the reader than anyone to take the pulse of the room, because while you're reading it, you're just like looking down at your page, you're like whatever. Yeah. It's like even in the audience, you can sometimes like sense like, oh yeah, everyone's like riveted right now, But yeah, it can be difficult.
I tend to only read funny things at readings, and so if no one laughs, I know it doesn't work.
I mean, that's the flip side. You're right. I mean, that's probably why I did it, is that it's definitely more entertaining. Yeah. But these ones might work more in these, because I did read this actually in a group. My friend Kylie did this writing group, and I read for them, and we did sort of a discussion afterwards. And so that was the first time I read it in front of people, and I think it went over okay. So this is part of an essay called larger essay called The Big Bad Wolf, and then it's divided up into sections in the way and I intersperse the sections with talking about different ways that writers have written the story about the Big Bad Wolf, because it's been written by a lot of different people, and it's always kind of this backdrop of, like, Anne Sexton wrote about it in a way that was very like clearly about sort of sexual dynamics and stuff, and so I thought that was really interesting. But so this section's called Making It Matter. I used to tell my mom everything, and the things I couldn't tell her I usually told my dad, and the things I couldn't tell him I usually told my best friend. But I was never able to talk to anybody about being molested by my babysitter. I wanted to. I used to play through the scenarios of telling people in my head how I would do it, what I would say, and there were times I came very close to doing so, too. There were times during intimate conversations where I would think, okay, this is the perfect time. and I would work out the sentence in my head. I would have it loaded in the barrel, my finger curled around the trigger, but no matter how I played it out, I never saw it making any sense. And so I would uncock the hammer, I would flip the safety. And look, here's the thing about that, about not telling anybody. I'm not sure what most scared me about it, whether it was the worry of what their reaction would be, or if it was letting go of the thing that until then had been completely mine and mine alone. And if I did that, if I let it go, what then? What if it didn't matter? Maybe holding on to it was a way to make it matter forever. And so I just figured that that's what I was going to do. I'd hold on to it forever. I would take it to my grave, or almost. Here's the way I saw it playing out, really. When I was on my deathbed, as I was drawing my last breath, I would tell it to whoever was there with me. Maybe that would be a wife or a son or a daughter. Maybe it would be a nurse, but that's how it would happen. I would just tell whoever was there, and that would be it. But then I wound up telling somebody, and then I told another person. I told exactly 2 people, and I noticed that as soon as I did it, it became a lot less interesting. When my mother died, I wrote my first piece about it, and I found that the telling of it had the story of her death wrapped up in it, which indicates to me how much I was holding on to the story of my being molested in order to protect her. Because once she was gone, I found it no longer mattered. Truly, I found a lot of things no longer mattered once she was gone. I think most of the stuff I've held on to is stuff I've held on to for her. To protect her, maybe, or to protect myself from seeing her sad. I don't know if I would be writing about it today if she were still alive, but here's what I do know. By not talking about it and by not writing about it, I made it too precious. And I feel like making a thing too precious can turn a small thing into a big thing, or a big thing into an unbearable thing. I made the thing my big bad wolf. Shame, after all, is one of the biggest, baddest wolves there is. I gave it its power over me by being silent about it. I made it scary to myself. But by giving it a voice, it became just another thing that had happened in a world full of unfortunate things that happen. It became just another story for me to tell. And I don't mean to make light of that. In the end, our stories are the most powerful things we have, but we all have them, and they're all important. And what's important about this particular story isn't that it happened to me, but that it happened at all. So I'm going to go on a little longer because I'm liking going on this narrative about shame.
Yeah.
So this section's called Repertoire. Let's talk more precisely about shame now. Let's talk about my shame. There was a certain period of my life when I thought sex was just like playing Go Fish or bingo or something. Maybe that's just how we all are towards sex before we have the brains and hormones to go along with it. Maybe most young kids think of sex as a sort of game. Maybe that's just the stage the brain is in then, and that's just how we are able to process it. There was a pair of male twins in my neighborhood whom I engaged sexually around the age of 6, probably. I don't remember their names. We didn't remain friends much past that age, I don't guess. They must have moved away because I have no memory of them beyond that time. They were over at my house once, along with a girl who I believe might have been their sister, but I'm not sure. I remember proposing that all of us have sex. I remember not really feeling weird or nervous about it or anything. I remember just being like, look, it's no big deal. And I remember getting us all to undress, and I remember putting one of the boys' dicks in my mouth to show them, look, it's easy, you guys. When I did it, I remember thinking how much smaller his dick was than my babysitter's teenage dick, which was, and still is, the only other dick I'd ever had in my mouth. I don't remember exactly how that whole scene ended, but I do know that it ended without us doing anything much more than that. I think somebody said that if this felt weird, and eventually we all put our clothes back on. I remember being intrigued by the girl not having a penis, but not really knowing what to do with that information or what to do with her that might be called sex. My entire sexual repertoire by this age only involved boy parts. In junior high, Halloween, this section's too long. I'm going to leave it right there. But there's another section where...
You sure you don't want to read it?
It's kind of a cool story because it's pertinent. and you can cut it out.
I think
if it winds up going too long, you can just cut it
No,
out.
I think we should
we've had
just do
people
it.
read for like 15 minutes. On
Yeah.
here.
Oh,
It's
really?
totally fine,
Okay.
yeah.
Go for it.
So this one's called Changing Power Dynamics. Well, in between those two is like another, like From Little Red Riding Hood by Andrew Lang. So each of these sections, which I'm not going to read because they're kind of boring to read, but Changing Power Dynamics. In junior high, Halloween, like everything else, really became less about games and candy and more about conflict and sex. The only costume the boys ever wore was all black, so we could hide in the night and engage in shaving cream battles with one another. And the girls' costumes all came straight from high fashion of MTV videos. My upper middle class suburban Houston neighborhood was as safe and demilitarized as any other, but on Halloween, it became a war zone. I don't recall there being an objective when it came to the epic shaving cream battles we had. I don't recall how we determined who was against whom. We pretty much just banded together with our normal group of friends and roamed the mean suburban streets. We never set out looking for shaving cream fight, but we figured it was good to have a few cans on us in case one happened to break out. So we carried a modest arsenal of Barbasol, either the red striped can, which was original, or the green striped can, which was soothing aloe. Middle school is that strange time between elementary school and high school when you are no longer a little elementary school kid, but you're also a pretty sorry specimen of a teenager. We were still interested in candy, but we were also becoming just as interested in sex. We were old enough to no longer have to be accompanied by our parents on Halloween, but the entire premise of Halloween still hinged on the assumption that we would be going out to trick or treat. And so to some degree, we had to maintain that position to our parents. And of course, this meant candy had to be procured at some point. We couldn't come home empty-handed. It was a complicated time. The Halloween night, Emily Ames, who had already grown a compelling pair of breasts and who had mastered the art of music video high fashion, got gang molested by a group of middle school boys. A group of boys, by the way, who were my age and Emily's age. A group of boys with whom we had all gone through the various stages of early childhood. A group of boys I knew by first name, who made up my world, as it were, and with whom, at various points in my short life, I had run on playgrounds and on soccer fields, and while not best friends, had certainly at one point or another, they had been my friends. That Halloween night, I don't remember what candy I brought home, but I do remember wanting to talk about what happened with somebody, but like doing sex with my babysitter, I just never did. I have since confirmed with one of my friends that it did indeed happen, and while we differ on some of the details, the gist of it is the same. Here's the way I remember it. We had all found each other that night in this one neighborhood intersection, an intersection of non-busy streets where we rode bikes and played street football and soccer in the afternoons, and in the mornings waited for our school bus. Dozens of us. We were boys and girls in that intersection, the same boys and girls we had always been, the only boys and girls any of us had ever known. We were each other's whole world, and we were all in that intersection, milling around, hoping for some kind of dramatic tension. There was rumblings of a shaving cream fight. Cans had been drawn, but nobody had made the first move. It was like everything had converged in this one spot. This was where the action was. This was the place to be. When Sam Littleton put a large dollop of shaving cream in his hand and stuck that hand down Emily Ames's shirt, all attention turned to them, and most of the rest of us went silent. Sam said, "You like that, don't you?" to Emily, and Emily didn't speak. Another boy came over, and he did the same thing to Emily's other small, barely developed breast, and she just stood there and pretended she didn't mind what was happening. Maybe she wanted to seem brave. It was not cool to show fear. It was not cool to appear scared. But then a few other boys came over, and things began to escalate. More hands were reaching out, trying to find their way under her shirt, and the shirt got more and more stretched, and both it and she threatened to tear. It was unclear what exactly the rest of us were watching or what we should be doing about it. We just stood there, sort of stunned. Then Emily, who had been stone-faced until then, started crying, and her friend Kelly Barnes stepped in and yelled at Sam and the other boys and told them to stop. And Kelly was small, but she was also goth and intimidating as hell, and I remember always being scared of her, especially after that night. Kelly screamed at Sam. She screamed at all of them, and finally the boys stopped, but they also laughed. Uncomfortable, but not apologetic. And all the rest of us, boys and girls who in our own ways were just as guilty for only standing there at a distance on the corner, watching this thing unfold, we walked away. And maybe not right away, but eventually we went back to our homes and our moms and our dads and sisters and brothers, and we told whoever might listen about all the trick-or-treating we had allegedly done, and we dumped our candy on the floor as proof. And we took a shower that night to wash off the shaving cream or sticky candy or dirt, and we acted like nothing of circumstance had happened. But something had definitely happened. I thought about that scene a lot later that night and probably over the next couple of days, and one of the things I remember thinking was that I wished I knew what Emily's breasts felt like. I even remember feeling a certain bit of regret that I hadn't felt them for myself, like maybe my unwillingness or reluctance to join in was some kind of failure on my part. It's strange and difficult to admit now, but I did feel a certain degree of envy towards Sam, that he'd felt Emily's breasts and I hadn't. But I also knew that the way the whole thing had happened wasn't the way it was supposed to unfold, that what I would have liked and what Emily had wanted were two different things. I probably wouldn't have articulated it this way then, but here's some of what I think I felt that night. We weren't 6-year-olds hanging out on the playground or in my game room anymore. Whatever we did or didn't do with regard to sex, it no longer felt like a game without consequences. These games we played now had different fields and different boundaries. There was an inherent power dynamic. I never got that image of Sam's hand down Emily's shirt out of my mind, or the way Emily had seemed so trapped and scared, but at the same time didn't seem to want to show it, or the way Kelly screamed at all of them and how her eyes were big and angry, or the way the boys just laughed. So that's
Damn.
Wow.
that section. So those, I think I'll end it there, but those were ones that I wish I had read more, when I was doing the readings, because I feel like they're more like direct.
You really pull in a room. I mean, I think you would have silenced the audience for sure, like we're talking about.
Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not good. But,
No, but I can see what you mean. It's like, it's asking a lot of an audience, especially if you come up, the person before you reads something really funny, and everyone's like, oh, we're having a good time,
Right.
And then you're asking the audience to say, like, let's step into this world right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people are willing to do that, but it's not like we always feel that that's like, the case.
Right.
It's hard,
How did you feel writing those, or writing that last one specifically?
This essay, came out faster than almost anything. I knew I needed something to just pull in all the other essays and kind of like indicate more directly what some things were about. And so that was like the last essay I wrote, and it was actually probably the easiest.
So that's what I was wondering is like we've been talking about shame a lot, and so like did that creep up while did you have any regrets?
Totally, but I was kind of like sweating, and like I was kind of scared, but at the same time I was like, I think this is the honest stuff that I need to put in there at some point. So
have any of those people who were involved in that read your book or know about it?
Yeah. And he hasn't contacted me to say anything, but I'm Facebook friends with him, the Sam character. That's not his name, but...
Yeah. I mean, the essays like that are so important because...
Yeah, it shows why, the second you wrote it, someone else came out and shared theirs.
And honestly, I'm just thinking about the fact that you are so willing to step outside the good-evil paradigm that so much like writing and media like succumbs to and deigns to,
Yeah.
And like you're
where this is, you mean
like right and wrong
like
is
this
just,
is right or wrong.
Yeah, right and wrong. I mean,
yeah.
you're in the middle of so much trauma and like weird stuff happening, and you're even able to look inside yourself and see where you might have even been at fault in certain senses. It's like,
There's
it's
another
great.
essay in the sexy section that's...
Is that what it's called? That's what it's called in your head.
Section, yeah. That where I talk more about as an adult, kind of having that feeling too, where, okay, I might have overstepped. It was one of those situations where I think we were both sort of in it at the same time for a little while, but then you know,
And
suddenly
you're referring to
just,
with your marriage?
No, with me having sex with somebody else outside my marriage.
But like as a part of an open marriage or whatever.
Yeah. But the person I had slept with, you know, that night was all in, but at the end she definitely, I think, regretted it, and then I just felt really bad. And so there's an essay in there about that, and you know, I can just sort of see where it's just hard.
Yeah. There's no good and evil in physics, like, you know, in objectivity, and like it's just the way we function is. I'm just very appreciative of people like you, writers like you, that are willing to get past the value judgments so easily and say like, let's like actually talk about what's going on here, not like who is the most aggrieved or outraged or hurt, even though those things are all very important. It's like, in order to really understand those issues, you do have to look underneath the surface, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely, anti, you know, violence of any kind.
Sure.
But sometimes things sort of unfold on Twitter, and I feel like people, I mean, the Junot Diaz was one of those situations where I just felt like people were attacking, and sure, he probably had done some not great things, but I just do feel like to discount sort of his past and was a disservice to him. It
just maintains the cycle, really.
Yeah.
To discount that past, yeah, it does.
We had a situation at Atticus where somebody, and you know, this is the way these things unfold. I feel like in the literary world, it's like people start. Well, do you remember there was like a document that went out about
the
bad
shitty men
list,
in media?
shitty men list?
Yeah. We have no experience with it, but like, you know, we know people who have been on it, and like, you know, it's strange. It's a very strange thing.
Yeah, the literary community is very small. I think, just for context, in case people don't know, that there was a list put together kind of behind the scenes that was passed around between a lot of like literary, like prominent women and non-binary folks who were naming people that had allegedly abused them in some way, whether it's like domestic violence, sexually assaulted, things like that.
Sexual harassment, anything like that.
And then it came out. And so like I think that the debate was like, can you put together a list like that without like forward coming, you know, because now these men just have their name on their list, but at the same time you think like how else are people going to come like forward, because you just can't in a lot of these situations. So but I think like there wasn't a real conversation around what was actually going on. I think it was more about the dramatics of it. But is that what, so that's what
this wasn't in regards, but that was kind of like what came to mind. But we had there was a situation like that happened, and I honestly don't even remember the guy's name, but we had accepted him, and we got
a piece of his,
okay, and we got wind that a lot of magazines were having a hard, you know, were pulling his piece because something had happened, and we were trying to figure out what to do, and thankfully we didn't have to decide, because he actually wound up contacting us and wrote us this really long email and said, this thing is blown up. I'm going to withdraw my piece. I'm really sorry. And said, you know, I feel like there's been a real misunderstanding, but I understand why this thing blew up. And I mean, it just seemed very honest what he wrote. And so we just wrote him back and said, thank you for writing. And I think, I don't know what happened with that. I don't know, but those are the types of things, like I've sort of wonder, you know, where that's going to go.
I don't know. I mean, you know, I think I recognized obviously a lot of names on the list because the literary community is smaller than you think. But we did have one person that we consider a good friend that appeared on that list, and that was not our experience of him, and so that was really hard to deal with. Just trying to navigate that, and it's like
the list is understandable as a reaction. I understand that, but I think the form of it and the title especially shows that shows that damning. It shows that we are totally incapable as a society of finding the correct way to hold people accountable for their actions. Because a shitty men in what is
media.
It in media, a shitty men in media list. The title alone says we're not interested in figuring out why this happened or how. Or like, you know, what to do about it. We're interested in outing these people and fucking their lives over. And it's understandable.
Yeah.
Like, you get
That's
the
thing.
anger, especially
Yeah.
when you have a whole species of women who are like getting harassed and assaulted for all this. It's totally understandable.
And then that just like
It's
drove
just-
someone to write the shitty women in media
Exactly.
lists,
It's
and
like,
became,
is it
cyclical.
helping?
Yeah.
No, that's the
Kinda
problem.
and I don't mean to
that's the whole
compare,
thing.
Like, I'm not comparing at all any of the women that were involved with that to
No, I didn't even
Donald
read
Trump
that.
or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Right,
But
exactly.
it is a very similar thing that we're watching unfold with Donald Trump and the way he's divisive. It's just becoming more just the way people are. And
Yeah, it's certainly
not
worrisome.
helping.
It's worrisome. Like, I really just hope that over time
It's
we
bullying.
can figure.
I feel like it's bullying.
Yeah, that we can
It's
figure
just
out
like-
a way to just
Yeah.
move past because it really is just staying caught up in the anger and the trauma itself, and instead of like really getting underneath the skin and figuring out how to solve these problems.
At the same time, I have no good alternative
No, I don't
to. I mean,
either.
other than conversation, we can say that, but it's really, really hard in these
just
situations.
well, I mean, one thing I've been wanting to do with Atticus, frankly, is have the conversation more and trying to figure out how to do that. Like, in one way that one of the editors on our team, Jen Maidenberg, and she went to a panel at AWP, and there was a good panel called Monstrous Men, Monstrous Women, something in the age of Me Too.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go, but I had to man the table during that time. But she went and said it was a really because we were both kind of nervous, like, oh my God, what's going to happen during this panel? It's just going to be a shit show or something. And it was actually like people wrote some really well thought out, smart essays about stuff, and there was a real discussion that happened in the room. And so we're talking to the woman who put that panel together, and we'd like to sort of publish all those essays that they wrote or for that panel, basically. So I don't know where that's at.
Wow, if
But
you
Jen's
need some
holding-
help somehow with that, we'd be, I think, very interested. in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, I just wanna,
There's so much, and I didn't even see this come. I knew what your book was about, but for some reason, before you came, I wasn't like, oh wow, we're gonna have this conversation about all this stuff.
Right.
And not just that character in my novel that I told you about, but there's another character who holds this secret about being abducted,
Okay.
and it's a wrapped up in this other situation, but how much I could relate to that, even though I had never been through necessarily I guess I have in my own. I've had secrets, but that idea of once you it's currency, right? Like I wrote exactly about that, and I was like, wow, I feel like we're on such the same wavelength right now, because I spent a lot of time writing about that in my novel too. Yeah. I think, unfortunately, I think we do have to close out. I mean, we could sit here
Thanks for-
I know, this conversation
We'll definitely have to
has
have
been-
you on again, for sure. No, this is great.
I think,
and I'm your book. I'm gonna read. I just finished a book. I'm gonna read yours next.
Oh, cool,
I'm really
thanks.
excited to read it. Yeah.
If people want to submit to Atticus, are you guys open for
Yes,
submissions?
we're open year round. We go on these little breaks every once in a while because we just get too overloaded, and so it's just kind of random. But
Yeah.
we'll take the submission things off for a little while. But mostly we're open.
And what
there's
are you really excited about it receiving coming up?
stuff that's
Good.
well, can I read you the little blurb on
Yeah.
our website?
Yeah, let's do that.
We know we got some great people who do listen to the podcast who need to submit. You know who you are. This is my shaming you to submit.
Right.
No.
No, I need to get back to it too. I mean,
We have one
starting
listener, Pedro, that I'm going to call out right now who should be writing more.
Oh, really?
And I think he
Okay.
really needs to. So
all right.
I just want to say that.
You said it was Pedro?
Pedro Ramirez.
yeah.
He won our Twitter contest, and that's how
Oh,
we
Oh
met him.
yeah, he's adorable. I love him.
He's a very good human, and he comes to a lot of our readings.
And I mean
stuff,
that kind
but-
of literally, his dimples are out of control. It's unbelievable.
So Pedro, you have to write something and submit. Anyway.
Well, we crafted this little thing, Jen Maidenberg, me, and Dorothy Bendel, the managing editor. We wrote this little thing, and I try to memorize it, but it doesn't sound good when I'm I'm just going to read it. So
Totally.
the writing in Atticus Review is unashamed, unadorned, and unafraid. We want our contributors to dig deep into wounds, to uncover words that touch the heart of the heartache, not to wallow, but rather to transcend despair through art and arrive at something hopeful. The stories we love are often lonely and sometimes ugly, but we're also deeply attracted to the bright, bold, and hope-infused. We like hybrid, unconventional work that pushes boundaries, elevates, and edifies on an intellectual level, that investigates the inscrutable essence of a thing, that avoids artifice to stand firmly in its unique voice.
Wow.
Awesome.
Can you guys come write copy for our submissions page?
So I don't know. I'm trying to lead us more towards nonfiction because that's where my bent is. But
do you guys do personal essays?
Yep.
You do?
Yeah. We have several on there that are really powerful.
Cool.
But we also, poetry and fiction as well. Fiction's the most submissions, but I think that's kind of universal across the board.
Yeah.
Atticusreview.org.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, you guys. This
is
really fun.
Thank you. This has been great. Thank you so much for coming on. I will read our closer, and I think we're good.
Cool.
Okay. All right.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and review on whichever platform you're listening. You can get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Animal Riot Press or through our website, animalriotpress.com. This has been the 18th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and featuring Dave Olimpio. Transcripts for our deaf and hard of hearing animals are provided by Jonathan Kay, and we are produced by me, Katie Rainey. See you later, you filthy animals.
Yes, sir, it's the burn. Bombing on y'all and getting gully as the fern. I don't know much about